All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about diversity and how we've come to be in the system that we currently find ourselves. So we're going to look at a model. We'll break that model down into some smaller pieces, talk about some examples, and move forward. So here we go. So what typically happens when we talk about diversity issues is that, first of all, our introduction to the world and to the norms and to the rules of culture, for the most part, come from what source in our development? Typically, it is our parents, our family unit, that determines a lot of what those norms are. All right. And so in our early years, what we get from our parents is missing history, bias history, missing history, bias history, and we get our parents' paradigms. And those paradigms consist of everything they know, everything they didn't know, and everything they didn't know, they didn't know, those blind spots. So in our early years, our family units give us bias history, missing history. They share their paradigms with us. They give us everything that they knew and they didn't know, and all of that stuff. And then as we grow older, we move through this chart until we get to a place of socialization. And socialization basically is summed up is learning how to act in a society. So learning how to act in society is the process of socialization. So what I start to learn is, even if my parents don't say it, is that I should respond to a certain group of people this way, or I should respond to women in this way, or these things are important to our culture. And these are both explicit and implicit things that I pick up as a young child as I learn how to operate within the world. These people are worthy of honor and praise, and these people are not worthy of honor and praise. Okay? And so I learn how to act and behave in a society based on all the things that I learned as a small child and the paradigm that my parents have passed on to me. Right? And so that stuff gets, so in the family unit, I get all of this information, these paradigms, this bias, this missing history, and then I get taught by society how to act in that society, or I learn how to act in that society. And then the society as a whole starts to reinforce these very same stereotypes or thought patterns. And that's done through the media. The media reinforces that. Government institutions reinforce that, schools reinforce that, and religious institutions encourage that. They reinforce everything that I've been taught thus far. And the whole point of this is to get to this pivotal point of internalization. That not only do I have this information and it's being reinforced by these things, that I now start to believe this information as true. This information becomes true for me because of all of these things. And not only is it true for me, do I internalize it, but in that internalization, I push it forward and I make sure that other folks know what their role is in this system. They also know what my role is in this system. And so I become an agent for the system. And so as we progress through this, we see that once we internalize, we get to a place where we collude with the system. Now, collude is a very interesting word because it means to conspire with something. All right? To conspire. Now, whether you know it or not, when you make a choice or don't make a choice, that is in fact a choice. all we have are choices. All we do is behave. And so when we internalize all of these things, we can then make a choice to, we end up colluding. That's the default mechanism. We end up going along with the system because that's what's always happened. But we do have and once we collude, we move into institutionalization, and then we teach our kids what we've been taught. The system operates the way it's always operated. It benefits the people it's always benefited. Systems perpetuate themselves based on a number of the things that we've discovered as a part of going through this cycle. And so institutionalization is the process of making sure that the institutions keep reinventing and keep selling what has been a part of the cycle for generations. But there is a saving grace, which is that you have the ability to make a choice. And the choice is to create opportunities for freedom. Right? To create opportunities for freedom. Or as I've often said, to free dumb. That dumb is free to go. Ignorance can go goodbye if we make a choice to do that. Otherwise, we continue with the system, the institutionalization continues to happen, and things continually to move the way they've always moved. All right? So let me give you an example of how this cycle works. So what is the popular story of the discovery of America? Right? The popular version is 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's the popular version, right? So let's look at this. What's the missing history or the biased history? The missing history is that it's very difficult to discover something where people already are. My neighbor just got a Porsche, and I'm trying to figure out how I can discover his Porsche. I think I'm going to use the Columbus defense. Not going to fly. Right? So the missing history is that the Vikings were here, that the Native Americans came long before across the Bering Strait. They came to the New World long before Columbus and the Spanish did. That is biased history. The history is biased towards the Spanish and the Italians. Columbus flew under the Spanish flag. He was Italian. So Spain and Italy are conspiring. No, I'm just teasing. Right? But there's biased history. How does that impact how I act or in society? It's extremely important. If I'm told that my people are nothing, and history in my early grade school reinforces that by not having me show up in history books at all, or saying that my contributions to history were minuscule to the world, then that could have an impact on how I get socialized in a society or how I act. And then it gets reinforced through the media. I remember that there used to be after-school specials, Charlie Brown specials that talked about, Columbus discovering America. The government supports that by giving people paid days off and holidays. Religion supports that in that, well, I find it interesting that, and I know these two people are not related, so I do want to say that. This is a disclaimer, but I find it interesting that Saint Christopher, who is the patron saint of travelers or lost items, is a saint. And then there is a guy named Christopher Columbus who was lost on his way to India, which is why he referred to the people there as Indians. That the church has this patron saint of lost things. So I find that very interesting. And also, there in schools, oftentimes schools still teach without balance that Christopher Columbus is noted for the discovery of America. And of the United States in particular. And so, as we look through this model, we can still see some of those old things still happening. And what happens if I start to believe this? If I believe this as the truth, and I internalize those things? Well, if I'm not a part of the winning team, then I can internalize it a lot differently than I can if I'm a member of the winning team. All right, so if I'm on the losing team, I will internalize this a little bit differently than I will if I'm on the winning team. And then I will collude, I will act as if that is the truth, and it becomes a part of institutions, and that cycle continues. And unless I choose to freedom, all right, and I can break that cycle. So we'll spend a little more time talking about this in just a little bit. Thank you. We've talked about our conscious, our subconscious, our creative subconscious. Now we're going to spend some time on how do we start building our subconscious in a way that lines up with our goals, our desires, and in some cases, what we need. All right. So first of all, let's we're going to take a trip back in time to 8th grade science. All right. So in 8th grade science, there was this concept of gravity. And what is gravity, or how is it defined in those science classes? Do you recall? Yep. Okay. So gravity was defined as a force that pulls, right? It's a force that pulls. And what are the two pieces of this definition that are important to remember around forces that pull? So bigger objects, so the bigger the object, the stronger the pull. Right? So the bigger the object, the stronger the pull. And what about the second thing? The smaller the object, the weaker the pull. So the larger the object, the larger the pull. The smaller the object, the weaker the pull. So when we look at this particular diagram, so we have two planets in a spaceship. So we have the little planet, we have the big planet, and we have the spaceship. Which of these planets will the spaceship be drawn to, given this rule of gravity? It's a force that pulls, and the two things to remember, that the bigger the object, the stronger the pull, the smaller the object, the weaker the pull. So which of these will our spaceship be drawn towards? That's right, it'll be drawn towards the larger planet. Why? Because it's bigger, right? That's the whole concept of gravity. So if we are, metaphorically, the masters of our universe, and we control what's created in our universe, we get to design what our universe looks like, metaphorically speaking. Can I use this rule of gravity to my advantage? All right, so let's say I want to move this spaceship away from this planet and towards this planet. Can I use the rule of gravity to do that if I'm the creator of this universe? Yeah, I can. I'll show you in just a second. All right. So first of all, when we want to change things in our subconscious, we have to understand this principle of gravity. All right. So first of all, let's call this planet old behavior. All right? And we're going to call this planet new behavior. So explain to me, why is it difficult for people to change using this model? Because their old behavior is so much greater than their new behavior. All right? So if I want to change this using this gravity model, can I change this if I'm the creator of this universe, metaphorically speaking? Yes, I can. The first thing that I must do is that I must make the mass on this side of this new behavior greater than the mass of my old behavior. Now, this is really interesting because I've learned this from car dealers because they're good at this. They are excellent at this. What happens what's one of the things that car dealers want you to do before you leave their lot? So you show up on their lot, you look at a couple of cars, you kick the tires, you close the doors and that kind of stuff. What's one of the first things that they want you to do? They want you to take the car for a test drive. Why? Well, let's examine what a new car is like. So a new car, you sit in a new car, and what does it feel like as you sit there? For the most part, it's pretty comfortable. What does it look like when you're inside? Things are sparkly, shiny, new. Right? You turn on the radio and it sounds crisp and clear. All the wipers and all those things work. They even have a special fragrance that they use for these cars called the new car smell. Right? So you have all of these things and you test drive it and it's smooth and it's nice and it's fabulous. And then you bring it back to the lot and you get out and you get back into your car with the French fries and the smashed Cheerios in the back seat and the papers and all of that stuff. How do you feel about your car? Not very good, right? Because the dealers have done such a good job of building this new behavior for you, making this so much greater than your old behavior. So, to change this gravitational pull, you must change your habits, your attitudes, your beliefs, your efficacy. And what starts to happen once you start rebuilding these things? Does this old behavior still have the same kind of pull that it had before? No, it doesn't. Right? Because you've shifted the gravitational pull towards these new things. You've made these bigger and better than what they were prior to that. All right? So, Andre, you've given us a lot of theoretical underpinnings. Let's get down to brass tacks. All right? So, let's talk about how we start changing these things and building these things up. So, I'm going to erase this. And we'll just make this planet new behavior. Okay, so that's all planet new behavior. So let's talk a little bit about how humans communicate with one another. All right. So how is it that humans communicate? How do we talk to each other, communicate? When I was a kid, and maybe still now, I like these characters called the X-Men. I like these characters called the X-Men. And the reason I like the X-Men, primarily because there was this one cool dude. He was a guy who was in a wheelchair, but he had mind control powers. He could move stuff, talk to people, all sorts of stuff. Didn't even have to move his wheelchair, right? And I always wanted those powers. And then one day I realized that we have those powers. and we use them every day. Now, I know some of you are like, what are you talking about, Andre? Well, I'll show you. So how do humans communicate? We communicate through pictures, right? And I'll give you an example. I've been in the grocery store, and there, where I live, we have multicultural grocery stores and communities all over the place, and oftentimes I'm in the grocery store and I'll hear someone speaking a language that I'm familiar with the language, but I don't know what they're saying, so I don't know what they're saying, and then all of a sudden they will say a word that I know, and I'm chimed in, right? I'm not trying to be nosy, but they did say something that was familiar to me, and so all the other time they're speaking these words, but I don't have a picture for those words. And when they say a word that I have a picture for, then I'm chimed in, I'm bought in, I'm understanding what they're talking about, or I have a desire to understand what they're talking about. All right? So humans communicate through pictures. All right? So here's another example. If you close your eyes and I said the word apple, what comes up for you? Some people say red, some would say Steve Jobs, other people would say a tree, so forth and so on. And you get those images because we communicate through pictures. Now, how do I get my pictures to you? I create these things called words. So the words that I use give you specific and particular pictures. For example, I just said apple, and you gave me examples of apples. Had I said rotten apple, you would have got a different picture in your mind based on the words that I used. All right? So the words that we use are important to get the kind of pictures that we want. And our pictures determine or impact our emotions. All right? So the words that we use impact the pictures that we hold, or the images that we hold of ourselves or of other people, and those impact our emotions. Have you heard anyone ever say, a picture is worth 1,000 words? Right? Yeah. So you can see more things in terms of emotions and feelings and settings, and all of these things can be demonstrated in a picture so much more effectively than they can be with words. All right? And those pictures stimulate our emotions. And our emotions are the fuel we have to do things. All right? It's at the core of our motivation to do things, are these things called emotions. And our emotions impact our behavior. All right? How we act. How we act. So words, pictures, emotions impact our behaviors. It's very interesting to me that I've watched those late night programs, like Feed the Hungry Children and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I think is really interesting is that they show these kids in these really horrible situations. And some of them have flies on their heads, and they're crawling out of, just horrible situations, and they're asking people to help them. Well, they show those particular pictures because they want you to have a particular emotion of what? For some folks, it's guilt. For others, it's responsibility. But they want a particular kind of emotion because they want some specific behaviors from folks. And what are those behaviors that they want from those shows? They want people to donate money or donate time or even some resources to their cause. And so the word, picture, emotions, and behavior model really can serve us well once we understand that that's what happens with marketing. That's what happens in our relationships, that oftentimes people have different pictures, and so they have different emotions, which is indicated by their different behaviors. But we can use this to help build our habits, our attitudes, and our beliefs and our efficacy in the direction of our goals. So we're going to talk about this model. You get your paradigms. Where do paradigms come from? They come from your parents, your family, and the people that you value, right? They give you their paradigm. Your parents gave you what they knew. They gave you what they knew they didn't know, and they also gave you what they didn't know they didn't know. That was their gift to them, to you. That was their gift to you. Now, what's the problem with this gift? The problem with the gift is most of the gift is missing. Now, your parents did the best they could with what they had to raise you. Maybe like you've looked for that book, How to Destroy Andre's Life in 18 Short Years, and let me tell you, folks, I was not able to find that book. They didn't plan to make the mistakes they planned. They tried to do the best they could, and I got to tell you, they did a pretty good job. But they tried to do the best they could with what they had, so they gave me their paradigm. And where do you think your parents got their paradigm? From their parents. And their parents got their paradigm from their parents. And so, for generations, there are things that we've learned to know and know not to know, and things that we don't know that keep getting passed along. All right? And so all of that stuff ends up getting written into our conscious mind, which gets funneled into our subconscious. All right. I want to talk a little bit about these blind spots. Now, what is the problem or the difficulty with having a blind spot? Well, first of all, let's back up. Why is a blind spot dangerous? How many people have driven cars or ridden in a car? Yeah, and typically blind spots are located where? They're typically behind, sometimes in front, underneath, on top of, and if you drive a Hummer, the whole thing is a blind spot, right? But what makes those blind spots so dangerous? First of all, did you put those blind spots there on your car? No, you didn't put them there. So it's not your fault that you have blind spots. It's not your fault that your car has blind spots. But it is, however, your what? Responsibility. Blind spots become dangerous when A, we don't know where they are, and B, when we don't take responsibility for them. I drive a Saturn View, and let me tell you, when I go to the rental car place and they give me a different car, my blind spots are not the same, but I'm still responsible for those blind spots. I'm still responsible for that car. I didn't make the blind spots. It's not my fault. I just stepped into a situation where these blind spots existed, but I have to take responsibility for those blind spots that I didn't even create. All right? So blind spots become dangerous when we don't know where they are and we don't take responsibility for them. Sometimes people refer to blind spots as racism. And racism is only a problem when people haven't taken responsibility for something they didn't create, or when they try to ignore them or don't want to acknowledge where those blind spots are for them. So blind spots can be dangerous when we don't know where they are and when we don't take responsibility for them. So in my rental car, how do I know or find out where my blind spots are? Now this is tricky, but I have to look for something that I don't know is there. I have to look for blind spots. I have to go out and I have to investigate. I have to adjust my mirrors. I have to move the seat so that I can be familiar with the blind spots of that rental vehicle, just as I'm familiar with the blind spots in my own car. Right? So blind spots are not our fault, but they are our responsibility. All of these things, what we know we don't know, the paradigms that our parents gave us, we internalize that, and that comes into our mind. All right? And so now we'll talk about how that gets funneled into our subconscious. Thank you so much. I'll be back in just a second.